We'll hit record.
Oh no. Jean said she just lost power. Okay. So it'll be one of those days, folks.
It'll be one of those days.
Okay. She says she's going to see if she could turn on her hotspot and see if she can join that way. Well, we can, maybe she can say something later if you want. We can just keep going. Well, welcome everyone. I'll take over Jean's spot. My friend and I would like to welcome you to the last session. We finally made it. I see a couple of us, Joy, Bree, Dawn, they ready to get the party started. They already got their background going and ready to go. Good job. So welcome to session 6. Again, I wanted to say a final thank you to our sponsors again, Triangle Community Foundation and Guilford Nonprofit Consortium for sponsoring the Nonprofit Management Institute. So we're going to quickly go over the agenda. For today, we have some closeouts to do. So first we'll go to a brief introduction, complete session 5. We're going to jump right into human resources, and then we're going to take a quick break and then go into graduation, which would be really fun. And as usual, you'll do your session evaluations and closing. I'm not going to read every one, but you can see on the right side what topics we'll be covering for human resources, which would be recruitment, retention, and reward that Dr. Palmer will take us through. One final note I would like to make, don't forget that in the wraparound session, we'll have the Duke Nonprofit Management Certificate form for you to fill out if you are interested in that or needing that. So please make sure you look out for that and get that submitted to us as soon as you've completed it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Palmer to take us back to transition to session 5 to finish up, which was on fundraising.
Excellent. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Love the virtual backgrounds that some of you have selected for this celebratory session that we will do at the end of our session today. So we have just a little bit more to finish up our fundraising topic. And so we're going to jump right in. We are being true taskmasters today because we have a certain amount of time to complete all that we have to do. So here is where we began to look at fundraising and really kind of focusing on identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship as those kind of primary stages of fundraising. And what we were able to do is we were able to work through the identification and the cultivation stages. But I do want to do just a little bit of a reflection of those. And so in terms of identification, of course, what we did is we focused on donor prospects and research. And in doing so, what we did is went through an exercise of generating prospects. And for those of you who are immersed in fundraising and how to do it and the different strategies and techniques that we use, the idea there was to help us to understand how important it is to manage our donor database, minimally to set up a donor database, and not to, we can go on to the next slide, and not to, I don't want us to minimize the importance of prospecting and the importance of managing our donors, our database and our donor list in a way that yields us the dollars that we're hoping for through fundraising. If you recall, we looked at an image, it was a pie chart. And in that pie chart, what we were trying to do is to highlight the diversification of bringing dollars into a nonprofit organization. And one part of that is the fundraising piece. And so we know that typically when we fundraise, we are able to utilize those dollars in an unrestricted fashion. And that's where we want to spend energy. Now, what I oftentimes notice is when I'm consulting with nonprofits, a lot of times our focus is on grant writing as opposed to fundraising. We need to balance that out so that we're getting more dollars in through fundraising. And so this idea of prospecting and managing our donor list, having a database system where we are storing that information, and having a strategy as to how we're going to make those asks to get dollars in. What I'm noticing is that we are finding that in the fundraising sphere, we are having to ask more people for smaller gifts. And of course, you know, for a long time, I'll say, the way in which we would build our asking strategy in terms of dollars is we would try to get, let's say if we were trying to raise $300,000 in our annual campaign, what we would do is we would try to get $100,000 gift, yes, one, right? And then a $50,000 gift, and then get those smaller gifts in the lower amount in terms of the total amount of money we wanted to raise. What I'm beginning to advise nonprofits on, especially the grassroots one-of-a-kind nonprofits, is let's flip the pyramid and let's ask more people, more donors for smaller gifts. So that 300,000, let's ask 100 people for 3,000. And then let's work that strategy, because what we're seeing is that individuals are not necessarily giving in those large amounts as we've seen in the past, just so that we can balance that out. So again, not to go in reverse too much this morning, because I know that we're wanting to kind of be through with this part of it in about 30 minutes. But I don't want us to miss that the strategy behind this whole idea of prospecting. And we went through that exercise just to kind of give us the fundamental kind of way of thinking about growing that prospect list. So that was identification. Then if you go to cultivation, which was the next slide that we had, the idea was moving from prospects to new donors. Definitely paying attention to our existing donors, having a donor base, and then having that donor base stored in a database system whereby that system communicates with us on when to contact donors or when to upgrade donors, et cetera. And then this other part of cultivation is analyzing and studying the donor giving so that we know where our donors are in terms of frequency, in terms of amount, and longevity. And so we want to kind of make sure we're paying attention to that, and that you are being strategic about upgrading your donors. So moving a impulse donor from impulse to habitual to thoughtful, you know, and so that's the analysis there of that donor giving. And then once we have a active donor base, meaning actively giving, then we want to begin to look at how to communicate with those donors. Now, I do want to refer to page 114, page 115, and page 116 in your material, because what I've just kind of explained is highlighted on those pages. And can we go to the main room? So again, you know, fundraising is all day, every day. You know, it's not just when it's time for our annual event, of which some of you may have. And it's not a one-off kind of management function. It's one where we are to be consistent and strategic and asking. If we want that donor base to grow, then we have to grow it. And it's real practical in terms of doing so. Now, I know several of our organizations, including the one that I shared with you that I helped start on a grassroots level, you know, we're smaller. We don't have a staff person to do fundraising. We don't have dollars set aside to bring a consultant in to do fundraising. And so with your board of directors, you want to make sure that you have a fundraising committee, and that fundraising committee is charged to support and help the executive director do the fundraising work all day, every day, because it is a uninterrupted, consistent plan that we should be working in order for us to bring dollars in. And not when we look at our bank account and we see that it's getting low, that's not the time to fundraise. We should be fundraising all along. And so that's just, I know these things may sound, for some, it may sound kind of elementary, but it's fundamental. And we encourage you to begin to work a system or to begin to work a plan so that you can bring those dollars in. And I'll go back to something that I shared before, and that is we're seeing where the smaller gift from more people is becoming a lot more doable, as opposed to thinking that we're going to get, if we have $1 million goal, let's just say that we're going to get those larger gifts like we've seen in the past. Does anybody have any comments related to that? That's what I'm seeing. What are you seeing in your organizations? If I could just hear from a couple of folks.
I would say that we've not seen a problem with having to go after our large donors. Coming from the Land Trust, we just completed a $36 million campaign, and we stopped for about 3 months before we picked it back up, and people were still just willing because of the cause. The cause is what it comes down to, and who's asking. If you have a small staff, if you have a small board, have a small organization, it takes a whole lot less time and manpower to go and ask for, $200,000 gifts than it does to go ask for $100,000 gifts. So I think fundraising is still strong. I think the numbers were actually up last year, and where I am now with the Psychoanalytics Center, we're about halfway through a $6 million campaign with a $1 million match that we're working on. So I guess we've just been able to reach out to people who haven't been asked, and that's a big part for these guys, is no one had ever asked them. So we just really started, and people were more than happy to give because they believe in the cause.
And where are you located, Van? I'm sorry, where are you?
So I'm actually down in Wilmington, but our office is in Chapel Hill.
Okay, thank you. He said a few things. He said the cause, people are given to the cause, so we need to understand and be able to explain that well. Also, who is asking, right? So like who's doing the asking? And remember when we did the prospect exercise, that was one of the things that we wanted you to identify. Once you had noted who the potential donor was, then indicate who would be the asking, because I might add the donor to the list, but I may not necessarily be the one to ask. And so that's important. And then he said there were people who have not been asked before. And so they see where they're asking new individuals. I would agree with all of those things, as I'm working specifically with the organization that's been around for 117 years. And they have been successful, generally speaking, in their fundraising. But what is happening is some of those donors who were giving at the high levels are no longer with us. And so they're having to kind of hit reset in terms of cultivating new donors. So there are folks out there who are in our communities that we have not asked in the past. And so identifying those individuals might be a part. Can we hear from maybe one other person in terms of how fundraising is going as it relates to reaching out to your donor base or setting up a donor base? Maybe you don't have one yet.
I guess. Let me turn my camera on. Hang on.
Sure.
Oh, upside down.
You're upside down.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, if y'all will just deal with that, I'll see if I can figure out how to fix that.
I don't think I've ever seen that before.
I haven't either. I'm going to turn my camera off because that's weird. I don't know how to fix it.
No, that's okay. Lisa,
sorry.
just when we thought we were having all kinds of things going on this
Woo!
morning, right?
I've honestly, I've been on Zoom a lot in the past 2 years, and I've never, ever had that happen. Anyway, so just super quick, all I'll say is I work for a very small nonprofit. I'm the only staff person, and I'm part-time at that. But last year we did make the investment in a donor management system, and it has been life-changing. I mean, absolutely. So that is my, if I had to give one piece of advice, if you can afford it or make yourself afford it, it is a game changer. I can't say enough about how fantastic it has been just to be able to have all of our data in one place, our donor data, to be able to look at things, on the fly. We can pull up a donor, we see history, we can see trends, we can see campaigns, we send emails through it, we can track emails, you can track giving through emails. Like if you have an ask in an email, it can tell you how successful that particular email was. So then you can adjust your messaging, you can filter and do micro targeting within the contacts or donors that you already have. You can, target and send messages to specific groups. So just, anyway, so we are using one called Network for Good, and I highly recommend it. They also have a fantastic program called Jumpstart, which it is, again, if you have the money to invest in it, I highly recommend it. For us, it's about a year program, and they do have grants available, I believe, that you can get assistance for those. But that basically sets you up with a fundraising coach for a year, and you have a certain number of hours, and you just basically go to that person and talk to them and talk about your problems or questions or whatever. And both of those things have been just unbelievably helpful for us. So again, that's my biggest piece of advice is if you can afford it or make sure you can afford it, is to get a donor management system. And again, that's Network for Good is what we use.
Jessica, do you mind giving us a ballpark of what that cost is?
I want to say it is about $2,400 for the year, I think, although that seems, I think that seems about right. And then Jumpstart was another, I can't remember if Jumpstart was 1,000 or 1,500, but I don't think we paid all of that. Cause again, they do have, grants, essentially. They have assistance for those. And one really cool thing, and I don't know that they'd make this exception for everybody, but you have a set number of hours you use for Jumpstart. And in our case, we didn't use all of our hours by the year date, and they let us have the hours until they're gone. So we're still using our hours, even though our Jumpstart ended, I think, in August. We still have hours, and they're still letting us use them.
Okay.
And there's different tiers. A lot of, because this does have email capability. So your price is different depending on how many contacts you have. So if you have less contacts, I think your cost is less. So that's another thing to consider with that. So it wouldn't necessarily be that much if you have a smaller contact base.
Okay. And I noticed for the group, pay attention to the chat, because our colleagues are putting in the chat some of the platforms that they're using for this purpose. Again, fundraising is about strategy, largely about strategy. And then comes the asking, of course. But a database system does help. Microsoft Excel, if you have Microsoft, the Excel platform or system, it can be used as a database system as well. And so you may not necessarily be able to afford one of these specialized platforms, but you could start, with a Microsoft Excel database. And a lot of times it's complementary to the other platforms. And so you can move that information over as your resources enhance in terms of what you have available, possibly to spend on fundraising resources. And so that's important. Jessica, thank you for that segue right into Rebecca showing us, sharing with us on the screen a database platform. And so Rebecca, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Try here to get it to work.
Okay.
I think Zoom is having some issues. I'm noticing there are a lot of, and my functionality, let me see here. Let me
Okay.
do full screen. Maybe I can get it that way.
All right.
Yeah, at the top where I would normally, actually, Leslie, will you make me a host or co-host if you haven't already? I think that may be the issue.
I think you should be one already.
When I hover across the top, I'm not seeing the option to share. Oh, here we go. Nope, I got it. It's down below.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So just as an example to share with you all, this is the center uses Salesforce, and just to be clear, none is better or worse. They're all good. It just depends on what fits your costs, your expense, and what you want to get out of the system. So for us, we have used Salesforce. We found it to be really helpful. This is a campaign here, so we've got all of you listed in here as contacts. When I send you those wraparound emails, I can go to send list email. I can also look at any activity across accounts and contacts. Accounts would be organizations, contacts would be our individual contacts. I can check on, membership. I can look at cases. Leslie tracks all of our pro bono cases here. And it's been really helpful for us in terms of donor management software. This is what we've used. I know Salesforce may be out of reach for some folks. I'm curious, do any of you use Salesforce? How have you found it? I see FlipCause in there. I used to use FlipCause at a previous.
I see mobile calls in there. Rebecca said something very important. So even if you look at what we've done here at the center, is the Institute is considered the campaign, right? And then we're using the functions of the campaign platform to manage the Institute and to communicate with you. And so so we are donors, if you will, if we could kind of say that. And then this is how these resources how this particular platform can be used. Again, we know that each of your organizations, your capacity to actually have or to acquire or subscribe to a system like this might be somewhat limited, but you can build out a database in your Microsoft package, and so using Excel. So I just wanted to just kind of show us how this can be done for some of you who may think this is out of reach for you. It may not. And of course, as Van mentioned, when your organization is a little larger and you have, more individuals to help you do what you're doing, or you have a track record, or you've been at this for a while, it may not be as heavy of a lift. But for those of you who are just getting started, that could be, it could be just a little bit different. So the question is, can your organization be too small? I'd have to know a little bit more about what it is, where you currently are. And then we could talk about what might work. I think it's not about your organization being small, it's about your donor base and your donor list, and how many donors do you have, and what do you want to grow? How do you want to grow that donor base? Because it's the donor information that you're using the platform to store that information in and use it. So I don't think it's about, in terms of, say, size of staff and all of that, because you may have a small staff, but you may be a $2 million, right, budget a year nonprofit. So there are a lot of things to factor into that as to what might work for you. I don't think there's one simple answer. I don't remember who that question was with, Rebecca
I think
from?
it was Kathy.
It's me. Yeah, it's
Uh-huh.
me. Yeah, so
Mhm.
we have about, I think maybe about 100 donors. We right now are using Excel.
Mhm.
And I was starting to look into that because, once, I've had Network for Good and Bloomerang and a few like reach out to me about donor platforms. And then I was advised by someone that we might not be ready for that because of our donor base is smaller
Mhm.
to be investing the money. But it sounds almost like, you have to spend some money to make money. So I'm almost
Mhm.
wondering if, even though we have a small donor platform, if that's something we should still think about, even, and it's funny, I just had a conversation with a Network for Good representative end of last week. She was awesome. And I did not know about Jumpstart or grants being available. So that might be something to explore a little bit more. So.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. If we could go back to the gallery, and then if we could move on to the solicitation phase of fundraising. So here in your handouts, in your material, you have page 117, page 114 and 115 are repeat. In terms of, we highlighted those handouts in the cultivation phase. But in terms of the solicitation, we know it is the ask. We put a worksheet in your packet as well, so that you would have a stages of fundraising worksheet that's on page 119, which also aligns with stewardship. So in terms of the solicitation, we generated the prospects, we identified who was going to contact those prospects. We had notes about donors. You put that information in your database, and then your data system, I think it was Jessica, articulated that and described that. It's the system then that starts to communicate back to you once you program it the way that you need it to kind of help you stay on track with interacting with your donors. And so that's one of the ways. And then, the other thing around donor relations is I know that, a lot of us don't necessarily pick up the phone and call people anymore because we're emailing and texting, but there's nothing that beats just a good old fashioned phone call to your donors and just checking in with your donors outside of the time for the ask. But just kind of checking in with them and providing them an update. Some organizations will use newsletters where they're regularly communicating. But what I have found in this past year, having worked with the organization that had to do a record time campaign, it was just a matter of me picking up the phone, looking at who those main donors had been for 10 years or more, a decade or more, and just picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, just want you to know kind of where this organization is, what it's trying to do. And it's like, oh my gosh, thank you for calling. I hadn't gotten a call in a while. So, and that may work for some. Obviously, we know that doesn't work for all, but some just real practical things are the ways in which we maintain those donor relationships. The stewardship, so once we receive the gift, page 118, in your material. Then it's time to share the thank yous and the appreciation. Of course, each donor has their own way of wanting to experience a thank you. And so we have to yield to how they want us to communicate with them and to what degree, they want to be applauded for their giving. And so that's important. If you have swag material, I think it is a good idea just to send some of those items out to your donor base and to your donors, just to let them know you remember them and that you are wanting to continue to stay connected to them. So that's important, in terms of that stewardship. Stewardship is also about communication. So if we could go back to slide 25 of the fundraising. So one more for me. So donor communication, we've been talking about this all around this as we're talking about interacting with our donors. Your donor system, if you have a database system, that management system is going to help with the communication. A lot of our stakeholders are, we go beyond individual donors. We have funders, we have volunteers, we have board members, we have staff, and we have folks who may no longer be on our staff that still support our organizations. We have the community at large. And so coming up with a way to communicate is important. Integrating your social media platforms with your traditional ways of communicating with your donors. Again, you know, these are real practical ways to think about communicating with your donors, and also in the attempt to establish new donors. It's consistency, it's frequency, it's you know, continuing with the messaging. Again, I know that it's challenging sometimes with our nonprofit organizations to have individuals that are designated to perform these duties, but it's all these things working together that really help fundraising. It's not one strategy, it's multiple strategies working simultaneously to help us to do that. In terms of fundraising programs, most of our organizations, if you don't already, we strive for that, having some type of an annual giving campaign. And in establishing an annual giving campaign, we oftentimes utilize the framework around the pyramid of giving. And so in this next piece of work that we're going to do, we're going to go into breakouts. In your packet, and I want you to work with some information that we have there. In your packet on page 124, you have a worksheet. And we want you to, and it's a scavenger hunt around some of our fundraising tools that we use. So page 124 is a worksheet, and you're going to be using pages 120 through 123 to complete this scavenger hunt in your breakout sessions. And then once we finish our breakouts, we'll come back on the other side and we will talk about this information that you're utilizing. I'll give you the highlights here: pyramid of giving, types of giving programs, and types of fundraising. That's the information that we're going to be working with. And so again, on page 124 is your worksheet. If we could go back to the gallery. 124, let me go to that in my material here. In your breakouts, you're going to be completing the worksheet. And as we said, you're going to be using pages 120 through 123. And so this is really information around the pyramid of giving, the types of giving, the types of fundraising, and annual giving. These are what we would consider to be highly fundamental when you're thinking about having a robust, if I could use that description, fundraising program or fundraising strategy. We are focusing here on annual giving for the most part. We should all have an annual giving campaign. This is not a capital campaign. This is a campaign that even if you did have a capital campaign, say you're going to renovate a building, you know, purchase a building, buy some high ticket items. If you were going to do a campaign, you would still do your annual campaign. So the annual campaign is important. And what I've noticed, sometimes when we do a capital campaign, we will focus on that, right? And let's say we do pledges 3 years, 5 years out. We'll focus on that, but then we're not doing the annual campaign. And so we're receiving our giving from the capital campaign, which is for a specific purpose. We're not doing the annual campaign. So guess what's happening? We're using those funds for day to day. And that annual campaign should be the apparatus that we're utilizing for that. It's not to say you can't incorporate in your capital campaign operations dollars, because a lot of times we do that, but they both should be happening. And so again, that's why a lot of times before a nonprofit will start a capital campaign, we'll do a feasibility study first, just to see if we can even raise the money that we're hoping to raise. And so in terms of doing that, or at least kind of reminding us and orienting us to that, we're having you to do this exercise using this information. So again, we're going to go into breakouts. You're going to engage in a scavenger hunt activity with your colleagues in your breakout session. And we'll come back on the other side and talk about what the information that you use. So Rebecca, I'm going to let you take us in the breakouts. And it'll be for about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and load you all into your rooms. We'll be back here at about 10:20. And Catherine, I saw your note. Just feel free to disregard the invitation to the breakout room when that comes your way, okay? All right, we'll see you guys in a few.
So, okay, so I think we're all back. And if you would kind of refer to your scavenger hunt worksheet. And again, we wanted us to work with the information related to the pyramid of giving. This is kind of I guess would be, again, kind of the fundamental way of looking at what we do as it relates to fundraising. So I'm going to just work right through the worksheet, and we're going to start at the top. And any of us can respond. We can respond in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and share what your responses are. How many giving programs was in our material? Kathy, so I see 3 in there. Let me grab my manual here. So we've got 3 giving programs. What were they? What were the giving programs? We had 4. I see the number 4 for our giving programs. Okay. Estate, major, and annual, exactly. So we had annual giving, major giving, and estate giving. Turn to page 121. Let's go there. And so we've laid out descriptions of each of these types of giving programs. Again, when we think about estate giving, we are talking about giving in the form of a bequest, or kind of our organizations being one of the areas, or one of the options for a person who wants to leave a gift with us in terms of our nonprofit organizations. And then we talked about this before, the major giving in terms of the, looking at individuals who have been giving oftentimes, and we're upgrading their giving. And so we have those corporate gifts too, and those foundations. And again, the capital campaign falls in that major giving category. And then we've got annual giving. We've talked about that just a little bit in terms of thinking about making sure that we have an apparatus where we are asking for our donors to give on a calendar kind of basis, where they just kind of get in the routine and understand how to give. Also, estate giving as it relates to thoughtful So we're upgrading our donors when we move them into that thoughtful giving level. The third item on our scavenger hunt or piece of information was match the 3 donor types with each giving program. And so the donor types are impulse, habitual, and thoughtful. Impulse is I give for the first time, and I'm moved to give out of the ask, of course. Habitual is I've given more than 2 or 3 times, and so I'm in the habit of giving to your organization. And then thoughtful is that upgrade to get me into the estate giving. So in terms of thinking about that. The impulse, again, would be more of annual. I hope that's what everybody put in your worksheet. And the habitual is the major, and the thoughtful is estate. So again, just giving us a way to frame the way in which we're thinking about our donor base. And when we say manage the donor base, what we mean is moving those donors from impulse to thoughtful, or moving those donors for just giving annually to giving in capital campaigns and to do estate giving. And then I'll just kind of open it up for our last item on our worksheet, which is what does the pyramid symbolize? And you can unmute yourself or you can put your comments in the chat. Number of donors. What does the pyramid symbolize?
I think it's kind of the cultivation scheme that you want to work with, bringing in your annual donors at that lower level. So you have more annual donors at the bottom. As you cultivate them, you move them up to major gifts, larger gift, and then hopefully with the idea that eventually you'll be able to get them at the top and have them provide estate planning as well.
Exactly. So if you go back to 120, thank you. If you go back to page 120, you'll see that annual giving is the baseline. And then you start to move those individuals up. And now also in terms of examples of types of fundraising for each of the giving programs, that's on page 122. So there's further explanation for those as well. And again, you know, fundraising is about consistency, it's about strategy, it's about asking, it's about the cause, and it's creating that plan or that framework for your nonprofit as to what that looks like. And so that's important to, as a takeaway from what we're talking about in terms of fundraising. If we could go back to the PowerPoint and just, I want to highlight a couple of more things related to fundraising. If we could go to 27. If you look at page 125 in your material, there's a handout titled Characteristics of a Successful Fundraiser. You can go back one. So grant writing, earned revenue, social entrepreneurship. This idea of social entrepreneurship is having a mechanism in place where we're able to generate revenue, able to generate income while we're addressing the social human service work that we do through our nonprofit organizations. And so I've just made sure I included that social entrepreneurship as a concept for you to consider as you're trying to determine how to describe your nonprofit organization in the fundraising space and the fund development space. I put grant writing here as a fund development strategy, but not as a fundraising strategy. It does help us bring funds into our organization My opinion is that grant writing is uniquely different than fundraising. And it definitely, when you think about your staff and who's responsible for grant writing versus who's responsible for fundraising, sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's not. And so we oftentimes, think or consider grant writing as a means of fundraising. We all have different perspectives about that. That's kind of my perspective as it relates to that. In terms of human resources, think about who's going to help do the fundraising and fund development. We can go to the next slide. Paid staff, volunteers, the board of directors. If you're fortunate enough to have resources for a consultant, that might work for your organization. But if not, then we have to put our volunteers to work, our board of directors to work, and then also obviously our paid staff. So in terms of fund development and fundraising, that kind of concludes that topic. And are there any just general, just kind of comments or questions before we move on to our new information on human resources? If we could go back to the main space.
I just wanted to ask why fundraising was not one of the fund development strategies. Is that not, would it be considered a fund development strategy along with grant writing and earned revenue and social entrepreneurship?
I separate it. Even our title is fundraising and fund development. It's not to say, it's kind of inferred that, fundraising would bring funds, but I do think it's healthy for nonprofit organizations to set that fundraising work apart from those other strategies, just because it is really, that focus is asking for the cash gift. That's really what it is. On the fund development side, I may be asking for human resources, or I may be seeking property, or I may be seeking some other asset that I need. And so I separate it for that very reason. And I think when you're talking to your board, it's important that they understand the difference in what that means, because some boards will interpret, if you're successful at getting grants, they'll interpret that as fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. We all know that grants mean we make a commitment to do work in a certain fashion, and we also commit to some other obligations that funder might require of us. Well, that's different than if I go out and I ask ABC philanthropists for $100,000 and they give it to me unrestricted. That's a whole different type of management that's required of the staff. And so I separate it for those reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Any other questions, comments? Just like all the other management functions that we've covered in the Institute, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And it takes time to build the capacity of our organizations to function at a high level in these areas. And so I don't want to present in a way that that what we are suggesting is instant and quick, because it's not. It takes time over time, right? Any other comments before we go into our break and come back for our new topic? Barbara, I saw your mic go unmuted. Were you thinking, or were you?
Yeah, I was gonna add, I don't know that it really much matters, but I'll ask it anyway. Fund development, would you consider like revenue creation opportunities fund development, or does that kind of bleed into program development? Where would you put it?
It is a part of programming, because you can decide if you're going to have a fee for service, or there's going to be some cost associated with one interacting with your programs. that's going to yield you earned revenue or earned income. So those two can go together. It could be separate, but they could also go together. Just depends on what your strategies are or what it is that you actually decide to do.
Yeah. I'm thinking like healthy opportunities pilots, for example, things like that.
What does that mean? I'm not familiar
Oh.
with that.
Oh, it's a Medicaid, North Carolina Medicaid pilots where Medicaid or is reimbursing for certain types of, services, non-medical services that impact people's health.
Is there a contract with that, with Medicaid? Do you sign a contract?
Yeah, well, so it's these pilots and there's lead entities that have contracted with DHHS, and then the CBOs, participate through the lead entities.
I am familiar with that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is a way to participate and maybe doing some earned income or revenue. The same is true with some local, like county government, DHHS departments and divisions like public health and DSS and transportation and all. There are opportunities in some cases for nonprofits to yield a contract to provide a particular service or resource. We used to refer to that as privatized. A nonprofit might provide some privatized service or program working in partnership with the county. Sometimes that happens with municipalities as well.
Well, or like food, pantries or food organizations,
Second Harvest.
provide diabetic tailored boxes to, under contract with hospitals and things like that. So.
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly what we mean by that earned. Some refer to it as earned revenue. Some refer to it as earned income. Yeah. And so if you all remember the pie chart that we showed, if you think about it in that context, you can work towards a strategy or a plan to bring dollars into your organization that, when we say diversify, to Barbara's points and question, that's what we mean, that you're looking at various ways to bring dollars into your organization. The one thing I'll say though, if you're going to go the contracts route, then it's important to have someone on your staff who's monitoring compliance and accountability with those entities, because you will be expected to report out in a certain fashion. You might have to have site visits as it relates to what you're doing. And so you want to make sure that you understand the compliance side of having a government contract or any other contract. It could be another type of contract. Okay. So that concludes fundraising. We are going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to work on our very last topic for the Institute, which is human resources. The time is 10:37. So let's come back at 10:45. Is that long enough? Our human resources workshop. And if I could have us go back to the PowerPoint to slide, it's going to be at the beginning where Lisa shared the agenda for today. I just want us to kind of be reminded of what we're focusing on. I think it is slide, there we go. All right, so we're going to focus on recruitment, retention, and reward in terms of how we've broken up human resources. And you received in your wraparound and your information for today, there's several links and there's several documents that we've tried to share with you to continue to inform you about these particular areas. Just with all of the other fundamentals of management areas that we've learned about, every organization is different, and you're going to be at a different place and a different level of capacity as it relates to what you do in terms of human resource management and how you do this as far as personnel administration. I would encourage us all, if as a part of your board of directors, it's very healthy to have a human resource committee. I think that it really helps out a lot when you have board members that have this background that can inform you about how to build out your human resource area. If you're in a position to do that, some organizations are larger than others. Some of you may be very fortunate and you have a designated person that manages all of these different moving parts as it relates to personnel administration. And then some of you, as the CEO or executive director, you may be doing this yourself. So I get that. It's different for all of us. So we've pulled out just a couple of areas as it relates to each of the 3 focal points that we're going to do a little bit of hands-on work with. And that's starting with looking at how to build out job descriptions and so on and so forth. But before we do that, we're going to go to, this is slide 11 for us, in terms of guiding principles and values. And so in your material on page 127, you have what is called the federal statutes handout. And it talks about the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, and then Equal Employment Opportunity Law. So Commission, Act, and Law. And we know that the commission is that organization that helps us to understand human resources and personnel administration from both an act and a law perspective. And so what we did is we were able to provide you with this resource that have some specific statutes that are related to equal employment opportunities. And so, so in that list, you have on page 127, you have the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 71, and also 1964 for the Civil Rights Act, and how that aligns and what those mean and how they inform us. And then we have the Equal Pay Act, that's 1963. And then there's the Discrimination Act of 67, Rehabilitation Act. And then there is the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Act, that's 74. Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 78. Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. Americans with Disabilities, this is one that a lot of us have to refer to quite a bit. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the ADA Amendment Act of 2008. There's the Civil Rights Act of 1991, and then Family and Medical Leave Act of 1993. Also, we shared with you, team, you'll have to help me remember, legal compliance, our legal compliance checklist that the NC Center has. There are elements of that checklist, there are items in that checklist that also refer to some elements of personnel administration and human resources. So I am not a equal employment opportunity lawyer. I'm not a labor law attorney, but we do want you to be aware of what you might want to refer to that to help guide you in your decision making as you're interacting with your paid staff, and also in terms of just personnel administration in general. And so we wanted to make sure that you have this information to guide you. Rebecca has also put the checklist, the legal compliance checklist in the chat that you can refer to in that regard as well. So we want you to know that this information is available to you. There's another area that we want to focus on, and that's equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so if we could go to your principles and practices guide and go to page 9. And if we could show that page on the screen here. And if you have it with you, hard copy, if you would refer to that. We wanted to highlight some practices in that particular principle that focus on or related to or aligned with personnel administration and human resources. So once you have that, we will, there are 4, as a matter of fact, there are 4 practices that I want to focus on. So this is our equity, diversity, inclusion is one of our 12 principles at the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. And the primary practice for this particular principle is for nonprofits to promote and adopt policies and procedures that help our nonprofit organizations create a more inclusive and equitable culture. So that is the overarching practice for this particular principle. When you look under build, you will see the first bullet and the third bullet relate to human resources and personnel administration. That first bullet hones in on professional development, both of the staff and volunteers, and letting and promoting the idea of helping us to understand the history as it relates to race relations. That's a tongue twister, as it relates to race relations. So at any rate, so that first bullet point is engaging our board and staff and key volunteers in ongoing professional development, and that professional development be about educating them related to the history of the race construct and racism in the United States, cultural competency, bias reduction, inclusion, and equity. So that is a practice that we are promoting as it relates to EDI and human resource management. The third bullet is for us to be transparent in our job postings with staff and the public about salary ranges for each position. So when we're talking about equity, you know, we're wanting to kind of share that. And we know that every organization is different and the way that you approach this is different, but this is what we've highlighted in our principles and practices guide for EDI. Under Thrive, it's the third bullet point. Use a race equity lens to assess, rework, and evaluate human resources and organizational policies and practices. So this is an area that we focus on as well. And then under Sustain, it would be the last bullet, develop a succession plan that includes leadership development and organizational goals tied to equity commitments, ideally integrated in the organization's strategic plan. So you see that overlap: strategic plan, succession planning, leadership development, organizational goals. But the idea is to tie those to equity commitments made by your nonprofit agency. And so again, this is page 9 of the Principles and Practices Guide. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is one of our principles, and the overarching practice is highlighted there for you in terms of kind of the NC Center's way of focusing and encouraging us to focus on these areas. We can go back to the main room here. In terms of EDI, I don't know, Jean, do you have any comments about EDI as it relates to a principle for, and the reason I'm asking is because I know she does, in terms of the NC Center and equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's been a focal point for several years now for the center.
Well, I guess a couple of things I would say. And first of all, let me say thank you all for your patience earlier. My home internet and my power went out just as this program was beginning. So you all know how to pivot. I have practiced that a few times myself. So thank you. the Center for Nonprofits has been committed, at least since 2017, when I arrived, to our Walking the Talk initiative. And we have done some really significant things, I think, for moving the dime within the organization of the center. Building on that has been a further commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and really thinking through how to address, how to become an anti-racist organization. And these are all, unfortunately, have become buzzwords. But we have committed to and have an outward-facing statement that says that equity, diversity, inclusion will be included, will be embedded in everything that we do. And we are going to, over the next 2 years, develop strategies and opportunities to really invite the sector, all of you, all of our members, to create some systems change in the ways that we really, truly, intentionally address equity in the nonprofit sector. So I'm not sure, and all of our principles will be embedded with, through that. We will look at each one of our principles through that lens, and we'll be updating how we interpret that over the next year or so. Is that what you were asking me, Dr. Palmer?
Yes, yes, and thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted us all to hear that, because this is some intentional work that the center is doing. And it's important for you to know that the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits is a resource for that. And so stay tuned for like programming, and we have our EDI roundtables that'll be coming up and so on and so forth. So there are resources out there to kind of support and help you better understand that. As we move into recruitment, we want to focus on writing job descriptions. And so we have in your packet two worksheets that we want you to complete. We're going to start with page 128. And you have 6 questions there. We're not going to go into breakouts for this. We're going to do this in the main room. And so what we want you to do is, for practice, we're going to complete a job description. We're going to write one, and we're going to do that for the role of the executive director. So that is going to be the focal point for completing page 128. And so in terms of that, we want you to, in number one, the number one item would be, what is the title for this position? Executive Director. Then 2, you're just going to give us some bullet points. What is the purpose of this position? What would this person do on a daily basis? For those of you who are executive directors on the call, right? What would this person do on a daily basis? What skills are necessary to complete these tasks that we're expected to do daily? How many hours per day per week are required to complete? Boy, that's another one. And then number 6, who will supervise this person? So I want you to just bullet point, fill that in as we craft this, not only the roles and responsibilities, but we're going to use that to build out the job description in about 3, 4, 5 minutes. So I'm going to go silent here for just a couple of minutes, let you fill that in, and then we'll proceed, because we know a critical part of recruiting staff and or volunteers or board members is to have job descriptions. And so we just kind of wanted to give you a frame for doing that. So I'm going to go silent for a couple of minutes, let you do that, and then we're going to work on filling in that template, which is on page 129. So our goal here was to, one, give you a template. Some of you may have a template already, but to provide a template for generating job descriptions. And you can do this with also with your board of directors. You might have a board member job description, like a general board member. Then you could have a job description for, or we should have job descriptions for each of the officer roles. And also, of course, our paid staff positions and or volunteers. And so really, once we complete the worksheet on page 128, then we do a matching of that information to your actual template on page 129. So we're transferring that information over into that worksheet where we would include that job title, whether it be a volunteer or paid staff person, the purpose, again, the responsibilities, we would convert those tasks, number 3 and number 4, into responsibilities, and then those work hours, and then the qualifications for that particular position. And then, of course, who will supervise that role. And so the idea is for all of our volunteer roles and positions, all of our paid staff roles, that we have job descriptions that we can share with people so that they really understand what is expected of them. Because later on, when we're doing performance evaluations, and we can do performance evaluations with board members, it's a little interesting, but it can happen. But then we use that same information to hold them accountable, to the roles that they've committed to, be it paid or be it volunteer. And so that's the purpose of that work. Any general comments about that? This is page 128 and 129. We just wanted you to work with that material or with that information. And now you have that as a resource to refer back to. A couple of notes on page 128 in terms of the roles and responsibilities worksheet. Just a few highlights of some notes that you might want to pencil in. Under number 2, what is the purpose of this position? The purpose of this position is twofold: to lead and manage. To lead and manage. It's both. In the executive director role, it's important to bring leadership to the table, and it's also important to bring management to the table. So it's like a combination of both. Now, we know that it's a balancing act depending upon what is going on in your nonprofit organization. Number 3, what would this person do on a daily basis? Well, from a center, North Carolina Center for Nonprofits perspective, it's the 12 principles, right? That we would be working to be effectively managing, leading and managing in the space of those 12 principles. And of course, we highlighted 6 of those in the Institute. And then in terms of skills, think about skills as education, knowledge, experience, or expertise. So skills, education, knowledge, expertise is a way to map out number 4. Of course, number 5 speaks for itself. The executive director is accountable to the board of directors. And so there's where the accountability and oversight comes in. One of the limitations of a lot of our nonprofits is that our evaluation of executive directors sometimes is not as consistent as it needs to be. And we definitely see that. And then some, as you know, have it down pat. They have a process, they have a system for that. For those of you who are executive directors and there is not a formal way of evaluating you and your role, I would encourage you to have conversations with your board to change that. It's important for you to have the opportunity to share as it relates to your performance, as it is good for them to engage in an exercise where they're able to communicate that as well. So that's the job description worksheet. And of course, the template is on page 129. Any comments about this particular part of our work? Hearing none, we'll move on to compensation. We have a question, Rebecca.
Are there ED president, CEO eval templates or processes that are recommended?
I do. Do we have those resources in Information Central? I think we do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
We do.
Yes.
Those, I'll pull some of those and
Mhm.
include them in the wraparound, if
Mhm.
that's okay with everyone.
Yep.
I'll make a note.
Any other just comments or questions there? Okay. As we move into this conversation about, or I guess I would just say presentation around compensation and determinants of compensation, we encourage you, again, I'm going to go all the way back to, if you don't have a human resource committee that's a part of your board, I think it's important for you to try to craft that, because that's where you're going to get quite a bit of feedback, information around how to look at compensation and how to exercise that particular part of a person's employment in an equitable way. And so one way of looking at this is a resource that we included. One way of looking at this is, what is the pay philosophy of your nonprofit? So just overarching, what is your philosophy? And then how does that align with the laws and policies in the EEOC information we shared with you? And then looking at competition. And I know we've been talking about that quite a bit in this season, because we see where a lot of us are having a difficult time hiring individuals in positions, and that's across industry. So it's not unique to the nonprofit arena. I was talking to a friend and colleague just early this morning. They're in a university setting. They have an HR department that typically has 15 staff, and they are down to 7 or 8 staff in their HR department. So, and they're trying to not only recruit for the HR department, but for the entire institution. They typically are at a certain level with their campus police, and they're down like 10 or 12 in terms of that. So this right now, we're in a season of where it's kind of difficult to hire and recruit, but nonetheless, we have to do it. So there are some external elements of recruiting and trying to bring people on board that are related to the labor market and all of those things that I mentioned. And then there is internally, you know, how are we engaging in personnel administration, engaging in securing the types of roles and positions that we need. And we know resources are a factor there. And then individually, the persons or individuals that we're bringing on board, what are we able to offer them? You know, what are we able to, and some of our nonprofit organizations are not able to offer much. I mean, let's be, you know, pretty candid about that. And so it takes a little extra work on our part to try to fill some of these roles, but nonetheless, we have to do it. So we included this determinants of compensation as a resource to help guide you in that. There's also another piece of information. You can refer back to page 127. There are best practices there for the employer and the laws. But then also we've provided a link there for hiring practices from the EEOC. And so if we could just kind of briefly show that. So the job description, compensation, hiring practices, and living wage is another resource that we included with this information. This would be the link would be at the, it's the EEOC link. Go to, Leslie, go to the, go back to slide 12 and go in the notes, and then you'll see the link to EEOC employers hiring practices. And for our participants, it's in your wraparound. It's in your information. There we go. And I just kind of want you to see where this information is, not to read to us, so these are hiring practices that have a negative effect on applicants. So that's a list there that we wanted you to see. There's another one too, Rebecca, that you and I were looking at for this. I can come back to that. Oh, I know, keep going to the end. I think that's what it is. No. There was another link that we looked at, but go back to the top. So this is the EEOC site, and you can see here, if you've not had an opportunity to kind of view this or review this, it really does have that pertinent information to really help us to kind of know exactly how to engage in recruitment from a hiring practices perspective. So I wanted you to know that that was there. We also included a link paying a living wage at your nonprofit. And so we also wanted you to know that that resource is available to you as we're thinking about determinants of compensation in particular. And then if we could actually go to the NC Center for Nonprofit Salaries and Benefits report. Again, these are resources as you're thinking about recruitment. These are resources to help us to, engage in practices that are going to be appropriate. So this is the compensation report for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I don't know if you all knew that this report was out there and that it exists. In terms of what it includes, it gives you some specific salary information, compensation analysis, any changes that have transpired, and then also looking at benefits. So this is a resource that can also help you as you're trying to craft how you engage in recruitment. So I just wanted Leslie to kind of show you where that is and what that looks like. And then there is also a national report that also gives some highlights there, and that link is in your material as well. So in terms of just kind of where we are with recruitment. Of course, as I mentioned before, in looking at recruitment, we're looking at those guiding principles and values. We're looking at job descriptions, compensation, hiring practices, living wages, and not to leave out background checks. We know that's a part of recruitment too, and also a part of retention. And so that's important to keep in mind. If we could go back to the PowerPoint, I want to kind of point out a couple more items in our materials. So in terms of retention, background checks kind of go both recruitment and retention, conflict of interest and confidentiality, employee benefits, employee relations programs, of course, employee retention, employee handbooks, a grievance process, and succession policy and plan. So let me just kind of point out a few things here. In terms of conflict of interest and confidentiality, this holds true for our board of directors, our volunteers, and our paid staff. So typically a board of directors signs off on a conflict of interest policy and or procedures once a year. That's typically how that happens. And then also, depending upon the type of services your nonprofit offers, a confidentiality signature is also required, depending on that. In terms of the confidentiality and the conflict of interest, it is a common practice to have staff, board members, and volunteers sign annually these two documents. And also, this is in our list in terms of our legal compliance checklist from the center that Rebecca put that. We talked about it sessions ago, but she also put it in the chat today. In your packet of material, in your binder, you have on page 131, a benefits handout on page 141. And then you also, 131. And then also on page 132, we're gonna go into breakouts here in a minute. 132 is pertaining to employee relations. And so what we wanna do is spend a little time in our breakout session looking at employee relations. So we're gonna talk about the total person and the fact that we're hiring and retaining the total person. And so for us to engage in employee relations practices that's gonna retain the individuals that we have in place at the present time. And so in your breakouts, you will have you're gonna use page 131, page 132, and page 133. And so when you go into your breakout sessions, we want you to generate examples on how you can build the capacity of your human resources with your particular nonprofit in some specific areas. And so when you look at page 132, we have the employee retention strategies here. And then over on page 133, your worksheet, we want you to work on in your breakouts how you can impact employee relations and how you might impact employee retention as it relates to paid staff, volunteers, board of directors, program participants, and donors. So we've included donors on that list as well. So again, we're going to go into our breakouts and we're going to fill in the worksheet. We also included some ways of thinking about who your employees are in terms of employee retention. And on page 132, you'll see experience, expertise, education, self-motivated, self-directed. These are all elements of who our employees are or could be in that regard. Questions before we go into the breakout. So you're filling in page 133 with your colleagues. And there may be some examples of employee relations and retention that you can share with your colleagues that you're using at your nonprofit organizations. So we created the job description and mapped out roles and responsibilities, their duties, what's expected. Now we're looking at how to recruit them. Now we're looking at how to retain them. What kinds of things do we need to think about to retain the individuals that we have in place? Questions about the breakout instructions? Okay, Rebecca is going to put us in breakouts.
We've got 5 rooms, and then Dr. Palmer, will this be, did we say how long we were going to do this?
Let's do 11:30. It's 11:23 now.
Okay,
We'll
great.
do 11:30. Okay.
Sounds good. We'll see y'all on the flip side.
What was the rest of that what was the rest of that question? Hold on, let me go back.
We had some questions about employee relations versus retention. Doesn't one lead to the other?
It goes back and forth.
Mhm.
It definitely goes, and it crosses over. You know, this whole idea of maintaining a level of employee relations, Angelique was talking about that very thing. You know, when you engage employees in the overarching elements of what's happening in the organization, when people know about a thing, they tend to be able to work with it and through you, with you and through it much better than when we don't include them, you know, in that. And ineffective employee relations also oftentimes leads to high turnover. And high turnover oftentimes contributes to low morale for the people that are left. So I'll answer that question that way, in terms of thinking about that. Angelique was sharing some strategy with us about transparency when we returned. Any other comments or about strategy from your individual groups? Let's take a couple of those.
I would just say anecdotally, I appreciate that, you know, in the worksheet, it lists out several different types of stakeholders. And I think what you focus on for a relation or retention for each of those will be different and also fluid. I would kind of boil it down to making sure that you focus on what the experience is for each of those groups. And if you can contribute a phenomenal experience for each of those groups, then you're going to be hitting high marks on the relation and retention piece. And, you know, Angelique, I'll agree with you with transparency is very important, but I would say that, you know, humility and vulnerability are just as equally important. It's one thing to just tell someone kind of what's going on. It's something else to kind of relate to that feeling, and what kind of the plans are, and to reinforce that it's a team effort. And that's, you know, everyone from paid staff to volunteers to donors, right? It's the story of we can't do this without you. Here's why. And I think that, you know, vulnerability, transparency, creating the experience is ultimately, I know those are all really vague things, but I think it all kind of like drives the success overall for, you know, the organization.
Okay. Can we have another just kind of insight of what you all talked about in your group and in terms of employee relations and retention?
We talked about if you want to float something all the way down here, that each organization has a overarching goal that everybody understands that carries all the way down to each of these categories, and everybody has a description of what they're supposed to do. And then there's a way of measuring that description at the very end. So everybody understands, it floats all the way down to the bottom. And but the overarching goal that everybody understands, we can go back to it, we keep looking and we keep focusing on it over and over and over again. It's consistent.
Mm-hmm. Consistent is the word of the day. Consistency. It does take a team effort, and all of our stakeholders matter in trying to do all of this work that we have laid out around these 6 principles and these 6 areas of management. It does take all of us, and each of the stakeholders have a unique role to play, and how we relate to those stakeholders and retain them is real significant, but uniquely different too, depending upon who we're interacting with. A couple of more resources that are in your material. There's an onboarding guide that we have included for you in terms of an NC Center resource. There is Wayne was talking about when we understand what's expected and all of that, it matters. An employee handbook, if you don't have one, a volunteer handbook, if you don't have one, a board orientation resource that your board members can go to that helps us to know what's expected of us, no matter what our role is. even for donors in the fundraising material, there's a donor bill of rights resource that we've provided for you in terms of how we should be interacting with donors as it relates to what their quote unquote rights are as one of our stakeholders. So that resource is also there. And one of the things that's very important in your employee handbook or policies and procedures or materials is a grievance process. So if I have an issue, where do I go? And then who do I share that with? Or what recourse do I have? Especially when the staff is very small, what resource do we have in place, for individuals and interns and volunteers? Where do they go if they have an issue or concern? How does that work? And making sure that they understand how to have their voices heard in that space of maybe something not going so well, and them wanting to communicate that out. The succession plan, having a succession plan or policy in place. I do believe, do we have queued up, Rebecca, the succession plan or policy example that was in Information Central? I think that's where it was. If not,
Let me see if I can open.
now
this up.
notice that, well, we could say this about every topic we've covered for the past 6 weeks. It almost seems endless as to resources available for human resources and personnel administration. But there is, the NC Center has a report study that was conducted around succession planning and the transition of individuals out of leadership roles. And so this is a resource from Compass Point where it kind of lays out an emergency succession plan. It's important for us all to kind of have resources in place. I was on a Zoom call last week with a group of executive directors in the southeastern part of the country. And one of the CEOs or executive directors on the call said that their board chair had recently passed away due to COVID. And that board chair was very instrumental in the work of that particular nonprofit. So, if for no other reason, the pandemic has created this necessity to know what will we do when some of our stakeholders are not with us for a lot of different reasons. And so that's important here. So Rebecca is sharing on the screen here, just a real kind of practical outline for a succession plan, kind of way of thinking about succession planning when you have a key stakeholder who, for whatever reason, can no longer work with your organization. So, so that's the last item under retention as it relates to what it is that we're working on today. The third and final part of the human resource topic is reward. Career development, promotion, professional development, having performance evaluations, reviewing compensation, and then the status of our workers. The succession plan, that emergency policy, yes, it'll be in the wraparound. So in terms of our focus here, there is on page 134, leadership attributes in terms of thinking about promotion and professional development. There are some areas that are highlighted there in terms of attributes of a nonprofit leader and manager. And some of those that are listed are in terms of attributes, being coachable, compassionate, confident, a capacity builder, competent, committed, and credible. And of course, we could add many more attributes to this list, but this does give you some ways to think about kind of growing your stakeholders, be it volunteers, be it paid staff, be it board members, some areas that we might want to focus on. And then, of course, in terms of career development, the NC Center does have area or space to post job openings for individuals that you might be, or positions that you might want to fill. So that resource is available to us. As I mentioned before, professional development, you can refer to page 134 for that information. And then there's a link that we're going to put in the chat. And I want to pause here for a minute under performance evaluation in terms of, so how do we evaluate and what are we evaluating? So if you could just kind of write in your notes these three things. This resource is human resource management in public service, human resource management in public service, but in terms of what are we evaluating anyway? So with performance evaluation. There are three different ways that we can look at this. We can look at it from the perspective of traits, 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 from the perspective of behavior and results. And I would say it's more eclectic. So when we're evaluating our staff, our volunteers, our board members, we can look at it from the perspective of what traits do the individuals bring to their roles? What behaviors are they demonstrating? We could go back to that list of attributes. What behaviors are they demonstrating as it relates to their work, and how effective are those behaviors? And do we need to help them make adjustments in that? And if so, how do we do that? And then what types of results are the individuals that we are working with? What types of results are they yielding for your nonprofit? So traits-based, behavior-based, results-based. And there is a link in your material that we've included in terms of referencing those three things. This notion of doing performance evaluation should be conducted at least annually. So individuals are getting feedback on an annual basis. And we've already talked about determinants of compensation. Well, that comes into play here as well. When we're looking at, the living wage, for example, and how we need to consider compensating individuals that are working with us. So if we could go back to the main room, what are those three performance evaluation areas? What are the three? I know that was a mouthful. Like, I even feel like that was a whole lot that came out at one time. Traits, behavior, and results. And I would venture to say that we would be looking at more of an eclectic way of doing performance reviews and performance evaluations. And I say keep it simple, particularly for those nonprofits that are smaller and you don't have a person that's helping with your human resources and personnel administration. I would say, make it really, really practical and include a self-evaluation component to it. So the supervisor of that individual is providing feedback, but also they're doing a self-eval, and you have that conversation together in terms of what the supervisor included versus, or how the supervisor rated or provided feedback around performance and the person who's being evaluated. The other thing I would recommend too is have yourself and another person a part of that dialogue around evaluation. Don't go into that space alone. You could bring a board member, maybe if you have a human resource committee chair, you could bring that person. They may be open to doing that. Another lead staff person may also be open to doing that. But I would encourage you to pair up with someone when you do evaluations. And that way it's not kind of a one-sided kind of perspective in terms of doing that. Again, we talked about the determinants of compensation, and how to go about thinking about that. There are resources, and I'll try to, I don't have that in my notes today, but it's coming to mind now. There are market analysis resources out there to help to determine what salaries should be. And so that's another tool that you might want to use, in particular if you're small and you don't have, kind of access to those resources. One of the final things that we wanted to talk about is the status of workers, which is exempt staff versus non-exempt. And it's always really humorous how we sometimes get those mixed up. And so we just kind of wanted to speak to that as well, as it relates to that.
And Dr. Palmer, I could chime in here real quick because I think it's funny too. So I'll start with independent contractors. I'm sure you all are familiar with independent contractors. Again, they're self-employed. One of the things you cannot control with the independent contractor, one of their hours, you can only thing you really have control over is the result of the work that's being done. They determine the how it will get done. And pretty much you go with that. Obviously, you're signing some kind of contractual agreement with this person in terms of time frame and compensation. So going on to, if there are any questions about independent contract, I think that's pretty self-explanatory on that one. For exempt and non-exempt, the main difference between the two is the eligibility for overtime. That's the main difference between the two. So if you are exempt, you're not entitled for overtime. If you're not exempt, you are to get compensated for anything over 40 hours. Now, in my agency, at times, if people worked extra, I would have exempt employees come to me and say, "Hey, I worked, 12 hours today. Can I be compensated for that?" Not monetarily, no, but depending on your agency's policy, whatever you have in place, we would say, okay, if you work 3 hours over, come in late 3 hours the next day, or make it up some other kind of way that would give them a flex schedule to do so. But that depends on your agency and what your rule is. But we encourage them to not put it on your timesheets because that's something that, again, they're not getting compensated for in terms of money. So is that clear? If any questions between exempt and non-exempt? I think that's the easiest way to explain it.
I do have a question about that. So you're suggesting that they, even for exempt employees, not to track the time that they actually work on their timesheets?
You track the time.
Yeah, we had ours
Oh.
track it on a different document, not on the official timesheet. We had a different document that they would track anything that they did overtime with.
Yeah, we would call it flex time.
Yeah, flex
We have
time.
a sheet where we would track any flex time,
Yeah.
when we accrued it and when we used it.
Right. Mhm.
So I have a question. Specifically what you said about contract workers. So I am a contract worker technically because of the way I get paid. But there is an expectation, or as written in my job description when I was hired, of how many hours a week I would work.
Mhm.
Are you saying that is not actually the case with contract workers? They can't actually dictate how many hours of week work as long as the work gets done? I just want clarification on that.
No, I think contractors, you don't necessarily, contractors will set how many hours. Obviously it's set on budget too, right? So how many hours this person is going to be contracted to work, but they have control of their hours. So if I'm a contractor and I say I can only do 9 to 12, and that's what you're contracting for me to do, I'm going to do 9 to 12 because that's the hours.
Gotcha. Okay, like the hours in the day. Like,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
And the agency gets to decide which roles are considered exempt and non-exempt, or is there, with employment law practice, there are certain positions within an agency that would classify or allowed to be classified?
In the law, there are certain positions depending on salary type, salary level, positions. Yes, all that depending on that. We probably should put a resource. Do we have a link in our?
It should be at the EEOC. It's on the EEOC site.
Okay, right. Okay, that'll
Mhm.
explain the different salary
Mhm.
levels and positions.
Okay. Any other kind of, that concludes our human resource topic. Are there any general comments about human resources or questions you might have related to what we, now, if you look at all of the information that we provided on the agenda slide, the recruitment, the retention, the reward, we highlighted, we pulled out some real specifics in that that we focused on in terms of kind of hands-on. But those are the areas of emphasis for the session. Okay. Wow. Whew, we did it. 6 sessions, 6 management functions, fundamentals. What other words did we use? We used all kinds of terminology over the past 6 Tuesdays. I don't know what I'm going to do next Tuesday since I'm not going to be with my group here. So we want to do just 2 things before we take a break and move into our graduation. So we're going to do a little intermission before graduation. If we could go back to the PowerPoint slide 15. So here we are. This is where we started. Our capacity building framework for nonprofit management, the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits way of engaging in the fundamentals of managing a nonprofit, taking into consideration leadership and management. And so our principles and practices guide lay out our framework for us. We have 12 principles. We focused on 6. We have 3 ways of looking at and benchmarking our capacity across many practices. And those 3 are the build, thrive, and sustain, right? And so out of that, we focused on 125 practices. Did I get that right, team? I think I did. Yes. Okay. All right. And so capacity building framework for nonprofit management. Any thoughts about this framework? You can unmute yourself, or any, just when you look at this in terms of what we focused on. Any thoughts about that? So we're gonna do one more thing. I said 2, that was one of the 2. And so we're gonna do one more thing. We're gonna kind of end where we started in terms of looking across the state of North Carolina and where we all are at the present time. Of course, I am in the Greensboro High Point area of the state. I am in what's called the Jamestown area. And you kind of cross the street, you're in High Point, you come back across the other side, you're in Greensboro. And so we wanted to do just a little bit of having you engage in some discussion with your peers in terms of how you're going to use the information that we shared in the whole entire institute. So Rebecca is going to put you in breakouts, and the question is, how will you use the information from the institute? How will you use the information from the institute? So we're gonna put you in breakouts. It is 11:56. It's gonna have to be fairly quick, Rebecca. It's 11:56. How about we just do it in the main gallery? Let's do that in the main gallery, and then we'll take our break, and then we'll come back for graduation. And you can unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. So the question of the day: how will you use the Nonprofit Management Institute experience?
Dr.
Or maybe
I'll
you've already
say,
been.
without being really specific, you know, I'm going to use this as a leader, as an employee, and as a board member, you know, on different for different organizations as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my organization is going from being fully volunteer led to having its first executive director. So the pieces on board governance are going to be very important to them so that we can make sure we have a good separation of duties and aren't stepping on each other's toes during this kind of transition.
Okay.
I think we'll use it at Emancipate and see as kind of a baseline that I can come back to, that we can come back to help ground us in fundamental organizational structures and help us, because so often we're doing the work and we get so entrenched in doing the work that we start kind of floating. And I think one of the things that I feel like I'm going to be able to take away from this training is that this fundamental base building, this foundational work that we've been doing and talking about over the last 6 weeks gives me a place to come back down, land, touch base, reorient the rest of my team.
Yeah, I echo Dawn. Our organization, of course, is I would say small in comparison to some of the people who I've come to get to know on here, but we've gone from my position as founder and ED being the only full-time to now being 8, even though 6 of those are part-time, non-regular. It's still a huge transition for us. So even like today's sessions, I'm in the middle of fine-tuning a policy handbook. So I was like taking notes frantically. And I think a lot of the resources similar to Van, I think going back to our board and having a framework, it's not like just a Nicole or the ED is saying, but no, these are actually legally compliant expectations as an operating agency that is going from programmatic to a larger organization that needs to fall in place. And now there's like an accountability tool and experts like you that I can say they said and reference points, and tools and templates that I don't have to create. And coming out of COVID, this has been so re-energizing and refreshing for me because I was stuck. So it's like you just help hit a lot of areas in the team. I'm like, okay, here's where I need to drill down and retrain my focus on where it needs to be to get us where we want to be so that we can continue to serve the community properly and be in compliance while we do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll agree. I think, when we first started the first session, we had kind of talked about how organizations can transition from the 3 different kind of levels of like thrive and sustain, and maybe back down to, kind of the building capacity. We're kind of going through that at our organization now as the new executive director. So this was primarily a framework for me to get the knowledge and industry standard practices, right? Get adjusted to some of the language and the buzzwords that we like to use and kind of draw them to my previous experiences. But it's also, I think, a way to scratch the surface on a bunch of different areas. And then I think focus more on some of the lower hanging fruit that we can identify in our organization. So board development is something that we're going to be using very intentionally across the organization. We've already instituted a lot of things through the board development program that we went through. And then I think the second one is fundraising. I think really getting through, what a sustainable strategy is for fundraising beyond, create an experience, touch base with everybody, right? Like how intentional can you make it? So I found those 2 to be the most helpful in getting a broad view.
Yeah, I'd like to double back on chance, and those are the 2 areas too that I think that I really gained a lot on, and also the finances, hitting that, and all of the legal compliance information. That's what, making sure that we're all shored up on that. I really appreciate the 12 principles. I just wanted to put that out there because it's like having that and being able to refer to those 12 areas to touch on is very useful for me and how I think. Sometimes this whole nonprofit sector just seems a bit overwhelming, but to break it down into like, oh, these 12 things makes it a little bit easier for me to chew and digest. And also the evaluation tool, I think is going to be very useful for us moving forward. I come from an education background, and evaluation was always the stickler, even with, in the classroom, like, how are we going to evaluate this and make it, and so I'm finding that a lot of that is bleeding into my work in the nonprofit sector too, is like how, keeping those clean. So I really liked, I like the framework that the tools that you have for evaluation, and it's helping me to rethink how we can apply those different evaluation tools and what we're currently utilizing.
Thank you for your feedback. Well, we will have an evaluation, that'll come out in the wraparound for this session on human resources. And so please be sure to do that. I'm going to pass this over to Rebecca to get us queued up for graduation. We are going to take a break before we do that. But Rebecca, I'll let you kind of share what's in store when we come back on the other side of our break. And thank you all for the feedback that you've provided. Thank you.
I agree. That's really, really helpful. We may be looking back on that recording and pulling out some quotes and asking permission to share those from you all, if you're willing, because there was such salient information shared in that and ideas about how you're going to use this going forward. That's really helpful for sharing with folks so that they understand the impact of this program. So thank you for sharing that. I have some sirens going on in the background. Sorry if you're hearing that. We will take a break, come back at 12:10. If any of you need assistance or would like to learn how to change your background, I'm willing to stay on and show you how I'm going to do that for my background. I'll put the link in the chat for you all if you want to download one of these backgrounds. I know some of you may have issues with being able to do that with your current setup of your computer, but if you would like to go ahead and download, I'll show you all how I'm doing that if you want to stay on for just a couple minutes, and I'll share my screen. But we'll see you back here at 12:10 and we'll kick off with graduation. Right, as we crescendo with our music. Welcome back, everyone. We will go ahead and, cut that right off. Thanks, Leslie, our conductor. Welcome back, everybody. I'll go ahead and share screen here. We're showing our graduation and we'll talk through a quick agenda. The next slide, we've got our welcome. Jean will offer some words. We'll give a commencement address. We'll confer the certificates. We will view the graduation video and also take some class photos. The class photos will come with your certificate in the mail, and then we'll have our closing. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and I'll pass it off to Eugene.
Are we recording? Just wanted to sorry to interject. We are? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Good to check though. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. So thank you very much. I am really excited for today's arrival. And this graduation is really all about each of you. You did it. And as Dr. Palmer said a little while ago, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You have successfully completed the center's Nonprofit Management Institute. This is important not just for the learning you gained. You have taken your role in the nonprofit sector seriously. You understand how important it is to develop yourself, and you have committed to capacity building for your organization. You know that there are many challenges in achieving your mission every day. You bring your passion for your mission to your work every day when you arrive. These past couple of years have been anything but easy. Many of you carried on in the face of serious health factors, supporting your staff, delivering services in new ways, learning remote platforms. Many of you may have been also homeschooling children or other family care during this pandemic. So please, let's take a moment to commend you. Please applaud for yourself and pat yourself on the back. Applause. And if you want to, put in the chat how good you're feeling right now. Completing this program in 2021 is a really big deal. What are some of the key takeaways from our learning together? I have a few. Remember your why, continue to grow personally and professionally, lead from the seat you're in, live into your leadership role, and find ways to practice self-care. Remember your why. Remember that your why can be deeply personal. Your lived experiences bring you to do the work you do. It is often so difficult, even as it is rewarding and soul satisfying. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for more than 40 years. And one of the things I've appreciated is knowing that when I put my feet on the floor in the morning, I will have meaningful work. I will be living into my purpose. I try to remember that all the administrative, operational, and resource management aspects of my job are necessary, but they are not the essence of my why. They are a means to achieve and fulfill my purpose. But passion and mission can be lost without good management and operations. Both are essential. If I do focus on both, then I am fulfilling my purpose. You are too. Continue to grow personally and professionally. What you're doing here is evidence of your commitment. This professional development can be as intensive as a graduate degree, as exciting and valuable as this institute, or it can be as simple as taking time out of your week to read and reflect. Being busy is not always the same as being productive. Remember that your organization is a reflection of you, and all who work with you, volunteers and staff, need support, affirmation, and capacity building. Remember to stop and say thank you to those who work with you. Nonprofit work is a team sport, and none of us can go it alone. Lead from the seat you're in. Know what your responsibilities are, understand your personal vision, and bring your organization to a shared vision. Knowing what you know, accept what you don't, and won't know everything you need to do this job. If you're an executive director or in senior management, you know that each day brings new challenges, often unseen. Be ready to pivot. My guess is that you all did this as our worlds closed down in March 2020. If you're here today, pat yourself on the back because you have been leading your team from the seat you're in, given the current circumstances, and you have survived. Live into your leadership role and recognize the leadership in those with whom you serve. Each of us and each on our team can lead and be a leader. Not everyone will be an executive director, but the leadership skills needed to do each position can be developed, and personal and professional growth can be developed from any seat in the room. When you develop your team, share and cultivate leadership with all those with whom you work, you will become a stronger leader. I have often said, if I want to take all the credit, then I need to be ready to take all the blame. While the buck stops here, getting here is a shared journey, and many hands lighten the load and increases the joy. When we achieve our mission, we can all celebrate and share in the success. And finally, find ways to practice self-care. Not all organizations have strong leave policies, and they should wherever possible. We give so much of ourselves each day, and in order to find that joy each morning when our feet do hit the floor, we must replenish. However, you can do this in ways that are fitting for you. Taking a walk, going to a movie, reading a good book, enjoying a nice meal, and taking vacations provided by your organization, and encouraging all staff to do the same. In concluding, we know that this past and still ongoing pandemic phase of our lives has been stressful, challenging, and yet many of us have learned so much about ourselves during this time. We hope one of the highlights of this time for you has been learning how very resilient you are. You are making it. We want you to know how much at the center we value you, your hard work, your compassion, your resiliency, your commitment to making our communities better and stronger. We also need each one of you to continue to take care of each other and yourselves. We're going to need each of you and your organizations more than before as we rebuild our communities after COVID-19. I hope that you have found this learning experience to be valuable, and we hope that you are members of the Center for Nonprofits. Together, we have a stronger voice, and we need you at our table as we connect and advocate for the nonprofit sector. With that, congratulations to all. And let me say again, thank you to our sponsors and partners, Triangle Community Foundation and the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium. Let's give a shout out of gratitude to Dr. Palmer for her guidance throughout this program and to the center's team that brought this to you. Lisa, Rebecca, and Leslie, thank you for your great work. And with that, I turn it over to Lisa.
So again, we just want to say thank you. Thank you, Jean. That was a very inspiring speech you gave there. I was real. I felt that. It's really good. Rebecca, what's next on the agenda?
We're actually going to pass the baton over to Dr. Palmer to do the official conferring of our certificates virtually.
Okay, all right. Well, here's the big moment. The receiving and conferring of our certificates. So on behalf of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, you have completed the Nonprofit Management Institute. Your completion of this training institute is formally conferred on behalf of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. So you may turn your imaginary tassels. Can we go back to the gallery view? Yeah, so
I can't remember which way it goes.
we can
Who remembers this?
turn
Go left to
our
right, right to left.
imaginary tassels. Awesome.
Yes.
Kudos and congratulations to
Well done.
everyone.
Well done. So we wanted to show our graduation video. I would imagine that a lot of the sentiments that are shared in the graduation video are would be similar to what each of you would be sharing. I hope that you kind of see yourself in a lot of the comments that are made in this, and thanks to those who participated. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll watch that, and then we'll come back for our photos and our final closing. Okay, can everyone see this? Right, here we go. Oops, hold on. Let's try this again. Okay, let's try again. So let me let Susan in so she can join us here. All right, there we go. Share. Make it nice and big.
Uh-oh. No sound.
Oops. Am I hearing no sound?
Mm-mm.
I'm not muted, so it should.
Did you share your computer sound?
Let me check.
When you do your share screen.
Thank you.
Dr. Palmer looks frozen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let me try this. I can share.
Is it because, Rebecca, are you wearing headphones? I'm not sure if that matters.
Yeah, let me try that. That may be what it is. Thank you. Let's try that.
And also the support
Yep.
that you gave to each other.
That's it. Oh. No, it was
You're
working a
muted.
minute ago.
She might be muted.
We lost the sound again.
Rebecca, is Dr. Palmer muted?
No, it's the tape, it's the video.
Oh,
For some reason, we're trying to get the sound to work.
Are you all able to hear?
No, we lost
No.
it.
Okay.
oh, it's Dr. Palmer on the video that we can't.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what's happening. But what I'll do is I will share this video.
Why don't we switch to a different part of the program and come back?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and we'll do our class photos and we'll do some wrap up. I can always send you all the link to watch it in the wraparound, just so that we make sure that we end on time. Don't want to keep you all past 12:30 if we can do that. But thank you for participating, and I know you'll enjoy watching it as I did in making it. So let's go ahead and go to, I'm going to get rid of my participant list here. Go, and we're going to do some quick photos. We'll go to full screen. All right, so the way we're going to do this is just with a, let me do stop share. Y'all are looking at yourselves right now.
Isn't technology great? I woke up this morning thinking I'm going to be working from home, and then people started digging in my front yard, and pretty soon my internet was off and my power was gone, and pivot.
It's been the theme of everyone's world these days. All right, so we'll go ahead and do quick screenshot of, I'll tell you which screen I'm on so you guys know to be prepared. All right, I'm gonna do our first screen here. Oops, actually, I'm on screen 2. So if everybody can give me 3, 2, 1. Nice. I'm gonna take one more just in case. Save this. Sure one. Are you all seeing me doing this behind the scenes?
Yeah.
Oh dear, oh dear. All right, let's do one more of this crew here. Make sure we get everybody. All right, ready? 1, oops, nope, come on. I want a new one. There we go. All right. All right, ready? For 1, 2, 3. Hold your pose. Ready, go. All right, that looks awesome. Let me save that one real quick. Right, save. And we'll go to screen 1.
Oh.
All right, let me grab this here. Y'all are looking fine. All right, do a new one. All right, 1, 2, 3. Awesome. I'm going to take one more just to be safe. Capture 2. Oops. Capture 3. So if we were all together in person, we would just, line up together against some background and life would be easy as pie. All right, do another one. Okay, last one here. Thank you all for your patience. All right, ready? Oh, you know what? It did it. It did it during that. Try again, new. There we go. Okay, that's why I'm getting it frozen. Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Okay,
Smile, everyone.
okay, let's try one more here. New. All right, ready? One. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you all.
You did it?
Ooh,
I think so. I hope so.
My cheeks are starting to get a little.
I
I
know.
know, right? Hold it, hold it, hold it.
No.
All right, so let's go over a couple of closing items before we part ways. Let's go to, if we could share our closing screen, Leslie. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in here a couple of links for you all that I want to draw your attention to. We do want you all to give us one final evaluation for today's session. I'm going to go ahead and pop that into the chat here. If you want to take a couple moments and do that, that would be great. And then we will be sending about a month after, there's a couple different links. So the first one is for the SurveyMonkey. About a month after, we send out a post-graduation survey to ask you sort of how you're using the tools that you've gained from this series, how it's impacted your work going forward. And so you'll see that sometime mid-November before the holiday. We're excited to hear back from you sort of like 30 days out and learn from that and tweak the program going forward. I did want to also mention that we want you all to join that Facebook group. The relationships that you've made in this and networking, the sort of support that you're seeing in this course extends beyond this 6-session series. And so please go ahead and join the Facebook group. It is visible, so you'll be able to click on that link and request to join. And extra credit if you go to the CAT post and you can comment in there, sort of what's inspiring you as a leader these days in the nonprofit world. We'd love to hear your responses to that. So that's a quick extra credit. And then a quick note about our, the Duke Nonprofit Management Certificate. I'm going to go ahead and pop that here in the chat as well, but we will send that in the wraparound. This PDF file, this is what you will fill out to go ahead and request transfer of credits. Well, you know what? Just to add to the fun, the only person that I sent these links to was Mia. So Mia, there you go, guys. So those are the links that we were looking for there. Here's the Duke Nonprofit Management PDF that you all can save there. It'll also be in the wraparound, so please look for that if you're interested in applying for those credits. There's a 15 credit max load for that, and each of them are $25. And there's a application process that you need to go through to fill that out. And then last of all is our conference coming up November 3rd through 5th. The theme is belonging. We would love to see you all at that event virtually. We're doing half-day segments, so it really fits into your schedule easily. We've got some great sessions, some fabulous keynote speakers. We're really looking forward to it. So please feel free to go ahead and click on that link above to register for that if you haven't already. And with that, we hope that that you all have enjoyed this series. Please look in the mail for your certificate and your class photos in the coming weeks ahead. And we've really enjoyed gathering with you virtually and going through this content. I want to say thank you to all of my my colleagues for the wonderful support, and we really appreciate you all being with us. So congratulations, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you all. Congratulations.